I thought it was like awe-inspiring. Like, I'm actually watching history. Like, even if he doesn't, which I hope he does, we're gonna say Donald Trump came to Sacramento and I got to see him. And that's what's really exciting for me being a first-time voter. This is my first election.
You know, me being a U.S. soldier in the National Guard for California, to be honest, no better candidate, man. Straight up. It's just when he speaks and the crowd yells the way they do, it hits you in a certain way. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, Trump doesn't just talk about loving and supporting our veterans. He shows it.
He shows it. $5.6 million, almost $6 million in only a couple of hours. Things Hillary and Bernie couldn't do in years. It's great.
Do you realize what's going on in Germany and Sweden and Europe right now?
That's wrong. That's
do you
dead
realize
wrong.
What's going on now?
That's dead wrong. And they have the same fascist, extremist ideals going on in Germany, all over Europe. It's dead wrong.
Well, do you know
what it's caused by? It's caused by desperation of white people. People are afraid.
We're not having
fucking tripping.
We're not having a race.
Nobody's racist. Y'all are racist. You are racist. Clearly, you came up to me at a
No. I'm not racist. I'm not a Mexican.
I said, listen to this, man, because you said,
okay, so you understand what's going on in Europe. Sweden right now is entertaining the idea of making a female-only pools because they can't control the amount of rapes that are going on.
Well, my guest today is Ella Grace. She's the author of the book, America is Infected. Now, this book details the true story, something you experienced, and it's highly controversial because it details the fight that you had, not only trying to fight against the medical system to diagnose a mystery illness, but also then against the court system who tried to take your child away because they didn't appreciate the fact that you were willing to fight for your son and not just accept the doctor's misdiagnosis.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a nightmare. Thankfully, we're coming to a close. And it started back in 2010 when my son got a strep infection. He came down with serious psychiatric symptoms, auditory hallucinations. He felt like bugs were crawling on him. He had acute OCD. He was in the corner. He was terrified. Something was wrong. We continued to call the pediatrician. No, we don't, that wouldn't happen. What's happening? I'm watching it happen. And so basically on the third day, there was another pediatrician that had answered the phone. He said, this sounds like an acute onset of pandas. Well, I didn't know what that was. I mean, a panda bear. So I Googled it real quick and I found that it was an autoimmune disease of the brain. I didn't know that it was controversial and that there was all sorts of stigma associated with it because it had just recently been identified that summer. So when I go to the emergency room, I'm like, oh, my son has pandas. And then I guess that sent up all kinds of red flags. And should have had a lawyer with me that day.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, he was admitted, and they did MRIs and did some various testing, and they did find one major infection. His anti-DNA B titers were super high. So they treated him with antibiotics, and he got better. But when they discharged us, they wrote a prescription for Zoloft and told us to take him for cognitive behavioral therapy. That was the treatment at the time. And so we went along with it. We went to 30 therapy sessions, but it was always confusing to me is how would a psychiatric medication treat a streptococcal
like a viral
Pyogenes.
pathogen,
Yeah, it's like, what? So anyway, go with it. Do what they say, right? We have to do what they say.
Right.
Everything that they say. And so we're being compliant. We're going every week. A year later, this thing happens again. But this time it's in his gut. And it's just like he's writhing in pain. I'm like, okay, therapy is not the right treatment for this. So I call the therapist. I'm like, come to the house. You've got to see this. Even the therapist said he needs to go back to the doctor for more medical rule-outs. I'm like, I agree. Go back to the doctor. I mean, it's like ring around the rosy. Where do you go? They don't know where to send you, or they don't do the right follow-up when they do send you. Nobody has the records. When I finally got to the conclusion, I did understand why, but when I was going through it at the time, it was extremely frustrating. And it was heart-wrenching to watch him go through this. The same time, I was experiencing some symptoms myself, and they were tingling of the hands and feet. I was losing weight, grinding my teeth. I kept thinking it was the stress, the financial stress, losing my hair. It was just, I had a finger break that just wouldn't heal. I had to have 2 surgeries. It's like, what is wrong with me? But of course, there was the recession and the financial strain and all the things that we hear cause all these physical symptoms, but still doesn't make much sense. So I end up on some psych meds myself for the anxiety and the sleep abnormality, and I end up getting nerve blocks because I get diagnosed with RSD. So we've got these 2 major mysterious illnesses going on in our home at the same time. I kind of tabled mine because it completely took the forefront in 2013 when he contracted a second strep infection. Theoretically, you would want to put a child with this diagnosis called PANDAS on amoxicillin to prevent future strep pyogenes infections, similar to rheumatic fever. But our pediatrician didn't agree, and so he contracted a second one, which put him over the charts. And it was so sad to watch. But all the pressure from everyone around me, the schools, everyone else involved, you've got to be stricter, you've got to implement boundaries, it's your parenting, there's structure, there was a divorce, it's your fault. So at that point in time, I was like, you know what, this is not going to be my fault. So I bought that James Lehman Total Transformation Flip Your Kids Around program, had my web guide make these 2-ply tickets. We had a reward system, marbles, debit cards, took them on trips, reading night. Anyway, it's still up and down the behaviors. I was like, okay, we can rule out the parenting issue.
Right.
And so it was just at that point in time, I didn't know what else to do. And he had ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, OCD, ADHD, rage. I was like, how is this possible with an infection? Mm-hmm. Unless infection is the cause of these things.
Right.
And so then it began to dawn on me why this might be so controversial. So at that point in time, we had to contact the juvenile court systems, we got entangled with them. They gave us a laundry list of rules that we had to comply with, or I would go to jail. They threatened me with going to jail multiple times, and we had to not let him do electronics. He couldn't hang out with friends. He lost his whole summer, all because he has this crazy, mysterious autoimmune disease of the brain that nobody knew what to do with. Wow. We finally got the right test back. The psychiatrist actually ordered for us, thank you, Dr. Asher, and it was positive. At that point in time, I went to the courts and I was like, okay, look, it's positive. There's a medical explanation for these behaviors. You would think. They didn't care a bit, not one bit.
Because you're already in the system now.
In the system now. And in fact, I'm not sure if I can say this, but I will. During discovery, we found all types of secret emails back and forth between court officers, like little hateful comments. There was so many number of times they could have stepped in and helped us, like at least 100.
Wow.
But this went on and on. They kept on putting him back in the detention center, Ultimately, we ended up in Maryland. He got IVIG because he was so advanced. He got steroids. Of course, the treatment makes them worse before they get better. Back in the detention center, but this time the judge put him in there for 5 weeks because I think she was a little worried about a lawsuit. And so solitary confinement for 5 weeks. And now he at that point developed PTSD in addition to the PANDAS. Wow. So dealing with all of these things.
And that's crazy to me because all you're trying to do as a parent is figure out what's truly wrong with your child. You're there with them. You could see something is not right. It's not working. You're doing everything the system is telling you to do. And we're supposed to believe that them taking your child away is for the best interest of the child. They don't care. They don't care.
What are you going to do with him that I haven't been doing with him?
Right.
We did the psych meds. You told us to do the psych meds. We tried the psych meds. They don't work. You know, when you have a flare, it's up and down. It depends on if you're exposed to an infection. A psychiatrist is not going to be able to pull someone on and off a psych med when they're exposed to an infection. So that's not the answer.
Right.
So ultimately, I was terrified that they were just going to keep putting him back in the detention center. They ultimately tried to take custody away from me. They took away my medical decision-making. And those 3 months we spent just fighting for custody of him. That's when I found an amazing lawyer. And thank God for her because she was able to help me in that department. And then I was able to get him back. And when he came back, the IVIG, apparently he needed more than just the one treatment. But the guardian ad litem interfered with the medical care with the insurance company, so we couldn't get that. So I had to figure out what autoimmune diseases were, because I was like, okay, nothing's working. And so I just started researching, and I started digging in deep. And I mean, probably several months of just reading. Nothing makes sense. Immune systems just don't break on their own. I mean, how did we just all of a sudden wake up one day and everyone's immune system is malfunctioning?
Right.
There has to be something going on. And I didn't know what it was. So I went back to work at the spa, and I just started asking clients. My clients are healthy clients. I mean, they're not obese, they're not sedentary, they work out all the time, they eat at Whole Foods, they do everything we're told to do. And they were chronically ill, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, kids with OCD, ADHD, families. And I started recognizing patterns. And so I just really felt like after being there for a while and watching this thing, whatever was happening was contagious. It was clearly contagious.
Yeah, and now I want you to kind of hold that thought right there, because what you found out is just absolutely mind-blowing. There's a reason why you use your pen name and why this is highly controversial, and why we're also seeing a lot of holistic doctors winding up dead who were dealing with a lot of controversial things, because what you discovered in just the path of being a passionate parent, willing to do the digging, is just incredible. And I think we're going to get some answers for a lot of people out there dealing with mystery illnesses and just this explosion in all of these disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And welcome back. My guest is Ella Grace. She is the author of America is Infected. It's a true story talking about her quest to rescue her son from the grips of the court system, as well as discover just exactly what was the mystery disease that was taking over your family's life. Now, you were just getting into the discovery, so take us there.
It was shocking, to say the least. It was my son and myself that seemed to be the most symptomatic, but I did notice some symptoms in two children that I had adopted. We had adopted. And that's when I just realized there was something contagious. Something was spreading. It was, I didn't know what it was. And my son had been tested for literally everything under the sun. So I did have extensive lab work to look at. Even though I didn't really know what I was looking at, I did Google every single word. And I did notice that, or I was told he had an active mycoplasma infection. So I launch into mycoplasma. And I'm like, what's mycoplasma?
Yeah,
it's supposed to be walking pneumonia. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be this relatively benign bacteria. The interesting thing is it's a very small genome. I think it's like 464 genes. It's the smallest. And when I figured out that there was nobody doing mycoplasma research in America other than Dr. Nicholson, I really didn't have many other options when I delved into the research. And what I found and learned rang so true with what had happened in our family. I cried for 3 days. I learned that in the Texas prison systems back in the early 1980s, they were testing with bioweapons, basically.
Wow.
There is a patent for this organism, and it is pathogenic mycoplasma, filed by the United States Army Pathology head researcher in 1993. And not only is it this bacteria, but it's been genetically modified to be more heat resistant, more immunosuppressive, and more virulent, also resistant to antibiotics. And the worst thing is they have woven some of the genes of some retroviruses into the DNA of the mycoplasma bacteria. So it is like a Russian doll.
Wow.
I have enough education to have been literally terrified when I realized we were infected with a bioweapon. Cried for 3 days, and I thought, oh my God, please, you know, there's nobody that's going to be able to help us. And so I just kept looking and reading, and I did find a treatment protocol. It explained everything. Dr. Nicholson explained everything about this organism, why when my son went on antibiotics and then he came off, he got worse again, why airplanes made us worse, why chemicals in our food make us worse. All these things, there's a reason for that. It's because we are infected with this intracellular organism that has been genetically modified, and most of us don't even know what's wrong with us. And nobody's going to be able to help us unless we empower ourselves and we know how to tell them how to help us.
Wow. And isn't it always just so interesting when there is some Zika virus or Ebola and this and that, you can always go back and see that some sort of governmental institution has a patent on it. And that is the thing that